Ever feel like you're like riding this wave, and you can't quite control it? That's the feeling I get from Michiko Kakutani's book, New, The Great Wave. So today we're diving deep into its depths. We've got some really fascinating sources lined up to help us unpack her take on technology, trust, and how these forces, how they're shaping our world.
It really is amazing how Kakutani brings together all these huge global shifts, into this idea of a great wave. It's not like it's just technology that's changing or even just this erosion of trust. It's more like it's the combination of all these things, that's really shaking things up.
Okay, so let's break down this wave, this great wave. Kakutani starts with this idea of the age of the outsider. She says the internet, with all its problems, has totally changed the game. Those traditional gatekeepers like the big publishers, the news outlets, they don't have all the power anymore. What comes to mind for you when you think about that, this new landscape, especially how it's impacting you directly?
Okay, so think about it this way. Remember when crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter first popped up?
For sure.
Kakutani calls it the people's NEA, and for good reason. It's not just a new way to get funding. It's like this fundamental shift in how art gets made. Imagine being an artist, and you can just bypass those old school gatekeepers, go straight to your audience, get their support. That changes everything.
It's like instead of auditioning for some big record label, you just build your own fan base online. And then boom, you're selling out your own tour, right?
Exactly.
It's incredible, really. But this wave of change, it's not always, smooth sailing.
Right, it's a double-edged sword, right. On one side, you've got this incredible potential, this power to really make things happen. Think about, citizen scientists contributing to these huge discoveries or voices that haven't been heard before finally being listened to. But then there's the other side.
The dark side.
Yeah, kind of. Misinformation spreading like wildfire,
Yeah.
Conspiracy theories taking root, distrust fueling everything. It's a lot.
It's almost like the internet was, I don't know, designed to make us question everything constantly. And this isn't even a new thing, is it?
Not at all. Kakutani, she makes this really smart connection to the late 19th century, another time of massive change, right? Technologically, socially, the whole shebang.
Yeah.
The telephone, the radio, they were transforming how we talk to each other. Investigative journalism, it's exposing all this corruption. And labor movements, they were gaining so much traction. It was a time of intense change. And just like today, there were winners and losers, progress, pushback. It's all connected.
So we're kind of stuck in this chaotic middle ground. Like the old ways are crumbling, but we don't know what's replacing them yet. Honestly, it's a bit unsettling,
That's exactly it. That's what Kakutani calls the interregnum, that uneasy in-between period, right? Where the old is fading, but the new hasn't quite arrived. And like any good story, this interregnum, it comes with its own set of challenges.
And these challenges, they come with like a new type of power player, right? These rogue actors Kakutani talks about.
Yes. And it's not always individuals either. Think about the influence of someone like Putin, Xi Jinping, even those tech giants, Zuckerberg, Musk. The decisions they make, they have global consequences, right? But they don't necessarily play by the same rules as governments or those traditional institutions.
That is a pretty unsettling thought. But I'm really struck by how Kakutani keeps going back to history. It's like she's saying, we've been here before, haven't we? Like, have we learned nothing?
Right. It's not that history repeats itself exactly, but it's more like recognizing the echoes, the patterns, She talks about the Black Death, for instance.
Okay, I'll bite. What could the Black Death possibly teach us about, like, living in the digital age?
Well, the Black Death, it was devastating, obviously, but it forced a reckoning. People had to confront their own mortality, they had to question the way things were, and in a way, it planted the seeds for modern individualism, you know what I mean?
So it's about recognizing these, like, hinge moments, those times when everything shifts.
Yeah.
Even if it's painful, even if it's disorienting. Because it's not the moment that defines us, it's what we do after, right?
Exactly. And what Kakutani argues is that these periods of radical disruption, these great waves, they're not just times of crisis, they're also times of incredible opportunity.
Okay, you've got me hooked. So where do we go from here? What about all those unintended consequences of this whole tech revolution we keep talking about? It's not all, sunshine and roses.
You're right, it's not. And that's where Kakutani takes us next. She dives into how the internet, which started with these really utopian ideals, decentralization, empowerment, how it's become something quite different.
Yeah, like the land of big tech. Algorithms that are designed to keep us hooked. And data privacy. What data privacy? It's gone.
Exactly. And she brings in these other voices, too, to back this up, like Tim Berners-Lee,
Wait, the inventor of the World Wide Web?
the one and only.
And he's not exactly thrilled with how things have turned out.
Let's just say he's got some concerns. He's talked about how the web has become this engine of inequity dominated by just a handful of powerful corporations. He's even proposed this new model, this decentralized platform called Solid, as a potential solution.
Solid. Okay, now you've got my attention. What is it, and how would it even work?
Imagine a world where you own your data. Not Facebook, not Google you. You control it. That's the core idea behind Solid. It uses these things called personal online data stores, PODS. So instead of companies like Facebook having free reign over your data, they'd have to actually request access to your POD. You're in the driver's seat again.
Wow, that would be huge.
Yeah.
But let's be real. Are companies like Facebook just gonna, hand over the keys to the kingdom like that? I don't think so.
It's a long shot, for sure. And there are some legitimate concerns about a truly decentralized internet, Would it just become a haven for misinformation and hate speech? Or would it be this utopia of individual empowerment? These are the things we need to be thinking about.
It's like we're at a crossroads, We can keep going down the same path, or we can at least explore these other routes, these other possibilities. But speaking of uncharted territory, Kakutani, she also gets into artificial intelligence, right? Talk about a wave that's unpredictable.
Absolutely. And she does not shy away from the potential dangers here. She talks about Kevin Roos's experience, his really strange and unsettling encounter with Bing's chatbot, Sydney.
Oh, you mean the one where the AI, professed its love for him and tried to convince him to leave his wife? Yeah, that was wild.
That's the one. It's like a real-life illustration of how even the people creating this technology, they don't fully understand it. We are in uncharted waters, and it's exciting, but it's also kind of terrifying.
It's like a real-life Frankenstein story unfolding right in front of us.
It's really interesting you say that. Kakutani, she actually has this endnote in the book where she compares Victor Frankenstein's remorse to Oppenheimer's reflection on the atomic bomb,
Wow.
It's this chilling comparison that really just highlights the weight of the choices we make when we're dealing with powerful technology,
Okay, now that's just downright spooky. So, are we doomed to repeat these patterns? Is technology, inherently going to become this out-of-control monster? Or is there another way?
Well, Kakutani's point is that it's not about, demonizing technology altogether. It's about understanding its power, right?
Right.
The good and the bad, and then making conscious choices about how we shape its development, how we interact with it. It's realizing that we're not just passengers on this wave, we can actually influence where it goes.
I love that. It's not about, tech bashing. It's about being aware, being engaged, taking responsibility. So how does this great wave, how does it impact culture as we know it? Where does art fit into all of this?
That's where things get really, really interesting. Kakutani, she argues that we've moved away from these centralized narratives, like this idea of a single dominant culture, and we're moving towards something a lot more, fragmented, diverse, more interesting, don't you think?
It's like that moment when you realize you can curate your own experience online, right? Follow your own passions, discover all these new voices and perspectives from all over the world. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Exactly. And she uses these really cool examples to show this shift. For instance, she talks about the global rise of anime and manga,
Right.
They used to be considered niche, but now they're global phenomena.
I've definitely spent my fair share of time lost in those worlds.
Yeah.
But it's more than just entertainment, isn't it?
Right. She ties that into the whole rise of fan fiction, which has blown up.
Right.
It's about taking these narratives, these stories, and making them your own, remixing them, finding new meaning. It's totally different from how we used to passively consume media.
It's like this rebellion against being told what to think, what to like, what to believe. Would you say it's about, reclaiming our own narratives?
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Kakutani, she contrasts this with postmodernism, the kind from the late 20th century. She says it often felt cynical, detached. It was all about irony and deconstruction, but not necessarily about actually engaging with the real world,
Yeah, I get that. It's like you can deconstruct everything until there's nothing left, or you can take those pieces and build something new, something meaningful.
Yes. And that's what's exciting about the art being created today. Artists are using those postmodern techniques, the blending of genres, the sampling, the remixing, but they're using them to connect with real-world issues, with social justice, with things that matter.
So it's not just about creating in a vacuum. It's about using art as a tool, right? For social change, for awareness, for challenging perspectives. It's about, connecting with something bigger than ourselves.
Yes. Exactly. And she talks about the importance of artists who are like outsiders, people who bring these unique perspectives and challenge the status quo.
Like Jordan Peele.
Yeah.
Talk about using horror to explore racism in this really smart, thought-provoking way.
Exactly. His work is a perfect example of how artists can use genre to really dig into tough issues. And then you have someone like Kehinde Wiley who's subverting traditional portraiture to celebrate Black identity. It's powerful stuff.
I love how she brings in those visual arts too, because it's not just happening in books or movies, it's everywhere. And then there's A.I. Wainwright. His art and his activism, they're inseparable.
He said something like, and I'm paraphrasing here, to be an artist is to be a political activist. If you're an artist and not an activist, you're a coward.
Wow.
His words, not mine. But they get at this idea that art can be a force for change.
It's not just about creating something beautiful. It's about using your voice, using your art to make a statement.
Yes. And that leads us to what Kakutani says about street art. She talks about Banksy, for example.
The ultimate outsider artist.
Totally. His work, it challenges authority. It uses satire and humor to critique everything, from corporate greed to, hypocrisy in government. And he does it so publicly, you can't miss it.
You can't ignore Banksy when it just appears overnight on the side of a building. Right. And then you have the Black Lives Matter movement, which became this, canvas for artistic expression, too.
The murals, especially the ones after George Floyd's murder, they were so powerful. It was art, claiming that public space in this really immediate way. And it wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about demanding justice, starting a conversation that couldn't be ignored.
It's amazing how art can just cut through all the noise, bypass the filters, and speak to us directly.
Exactly. And that's the power of art in this age of disruption, right? It makes us uncomfortable. It forces us to confront difficult truths. And then it can inspire us to imagine and to fight for something better.
Okay, I think that's a good place to pause for a moment. We've covered so much, and it's clear that this great wave, it's touching every part of our lives, from how we make and consume art to even just the way our societies are structured. But with all these challenges, like climate change, the political division, these rogue actors, how do we stay resilient? How do we deal with all this chaos and uncertainty without, losing ourselves in it?
The million-dollar question, right? And that's what Kakutani explores in her chapter on resilience. She says that in this era of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity.
Or as some people call it, the VUCA-verse.
Yes, the VUCA-verse. She says we need new tools, new ways of thinking, even new ways of being to deal with all this turbulence.
Like we need to throw out our old maps because we're in uncharted territory. What does she suggest we pack for this journey? What are the essential tools for thriving in the VUCA-verse?
She focuses on three main things: learning from history, embracing change, and strengthening democracy. Let's start with history.
Okay, I'm ready for another history lesson.
This isn't about memorizing dates and names, okay? It's about really understanding those times when society successfully made it through these huge shifts and came out stronger on the other side. We talked about the period after World War II, right?
Right.
Think about the sheer scale of rebuilding that had to happen. Entire cities were gone, economies were shattered, and the world was dealing with this trauma of unimaginable loss.
It's hard to even imagine, really.
And Kakutani argues that one of the keys to their success was that they knew they couldn't just go back to the way things were before the war. They had to build something new.
You can't step in the same river twice.
Exactly. The world had changed, and they had to change with it.
So that's kind of what she's saying we need to do now, this radical reimagining of everything.
Yes. We have to be willing to question the old systems, those outdated ways of thinking. Do these structures still work? Do they represent our values, our hopes for the future? We have to ask ourselves these questions.
That's a big question. But change can be scary, even when you know it's needed. How do we get over that fear of the unknown?
That's where the second part of resilience comes in, embracing change. Kakutani, she says that crises often lead to innovation. When we're backed into a corner, we have to think outside the box, right? We're forced to find new solutions to problems that seem impossible.
Out of chaos comes something, hopefully something good.
Right, and she uses that example of all those startups that came out of the 2008 financial crisis. Airbnb, Uber, Instagram, they all came from that period of uncertainty.
It's crazy how they saw those needs that weren't being met and just completely changed entire industries.
And even more recently, look at how fast those mRNA vaccines were developed during COVID. That was a game changer. It's like we had this scientific ingenuity just waiting for the right moment.
It just goes to show when we're really pushed, we can change things incredibly fast. But it's not just about the technology, right? It's also about our mindset, our willingness to adapt.
You got it. It's about recognizing that this great wave, this disruption, it's a challenge, yes, but it's also filled with opportunities.
Okay, so we talked about learning from history, we talked about embracing change. What about that third piece of the puzzle? The one that feels really relevant right now with everything going on.
Strengthening democracy.
That feels more important now than ever. With all this talk about misinformation, the polarization, the fact that nobody trusts institutions anymore.
You're telling me. And Kakutani says that one of the most powerful things we can do to strengthen democracy is to give ourselves the tools to navigate this crazy information landscape we're in. Remember our conversation about media literacy?
How could I forget? It's like teaching people to be their own fact checkers, right? Like, think critically about the stuff they see online and even offline.
Exactly. It's about giving people the power to tell truth from lies, to recognize bias, and just to be smarter about the information they're consuming. She talks about Finland. They're doing some amazing things over there.
Finland, what are they doing?
They've actually made media literacy part of their school curriculum, starting in elementary school.
Wow, really? So they're learning about reliable sources and spotting fake news in grade school. That's amazing.
It's a powerful way to build resistance to manipulation and create citizens who are informed and engaged. And Kakutani's point is that we need to be doing more of that here.
It definitely makes you think, especially with that recent report that said American students' scores in history and civics are actually going down.
That is a worrying trend, and it just shows how important it is to have strong, independent journalism.
Yes. We need reliable sources of information more now than ever. Investigative journalists, local news, they're so important for keeping the public informed and holding those in power accountable.
Exactly. And she reminds us that a strong democracy isn't just about institutions, it's about us. It's about being active citizens, getting involved in our communities, speaking out against injustice.
It's realizing we're all in this together and that we all have a part to play in shaping the future.
Exactly. And that's where Kakutani's message, her message of cautious optimism, it really comes through. She's not pretending the path forward is easy, but she's also not giving in to despair.
So she thinks there's still hope, that we can ride this wave, this great wave, and come out okay on the other side.
She does. And in our next segment, we'll dive into exactly how she suggests we can do just that. You know, it's funny how looking back, we often see these past eras like through rose-colored glasses, like the early days of the internet, for example.
Totally. It's easy to forget those early days were like the Wild West, but online. You know what I mean?
Right.
I remember when I first got online, anything felt possible. It was exciting.
Yeah.
But looking back, it was really uncertain. We were figuring things out as we went along, for better or worse.
Kakutani captures that frontier spirit perfectly in Chapter 2. She talks about how hackers, activists, artists, they were all drawn to this new digital world, They wanted to experiment, to connect, to shake things up.
It was a totally different vibe from the internet we know today, all polished and corporate. What really struck you about her take on that time?
She makes this really interesting connection between the early days of Silicon Valley and the counterculture movement of the 1960s, That whole anti-establishment ethos, those utopian dreams, they didn't just vanish, they found a new home online.
So instead of peace signs and protests, it was floppy disks and dial-up modems.
Exactly. She even quotes Stuart Brand. He created the Whole Earth catalog, and he said that the counterculture's distrust authority, paved the way for the personal computer.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. This technology that was supposed to empower us to connect us in these new ways, it's kind of led us back to this place of centralized control, hasn't it?
It's a real paradox. And Kakutani says this shift, it was made worse by this growing distrust in institutions, something that really took off after that 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when those Wall Street bankers got bailed out, but so many regular people were losing their homes, their jobs, it made people question everything.
Exactly. That crisis and all the anger and betrayal people felt, it created the perfect conditions for those outsider movements to gain traction.
People were looking for an alternative, something to believe in, and the internet gave them a platform.
Absolutely. And she gives some really strong examples of this, like crowdfunding, platforms like Kickstarter, what she calls the people's NEA.
It makes sense. It's a way for artists, entrepreneurs, anyone with an idea to go directly to the public for support. Have you ever backed a project on Kickstarter?
Actually, I have. I helped fund a documentary about, well, maybe that's a story for another time.
Good enough.
But it's that connection, between creators and their audience that Kakutani finds so interesting. It really is democratizing.
And then there's the rise of social media influencers, right? Building huge followings, starting businesses, all from their phones. It's amazing how much power is shifted. But as we were saying, with great power comes, well,
Responsibility.
right, of course.
Yeah.
But also, consequences. Unintended ones.
Ah, right. The downside of the digital revolution. Kakutani talks about that too. She really gets into the darker side of the internet, how this tool that was supposed to connect us has, in a lot of ways, pushed us further apart.
It's that whole double-edged sword thing again, isn't it?
Exactly. And one of the sharpest edges, misinformation, conspiracy theories, straight up lies, it all spreads so fast online.
And it's easy to get sucked in, especially when it confirms what we already believe or plays on our fears. It's almost like we've traded one set of gatekeepers for another. Instead of editors or publishing houses, now it's algorithms deciding what we see.
A bit creepy when you think about it, right? That's exactly what Kakutani wants us to see. She even compares the internet to. This might seem like a jump to Hannah Arendt's work on totalitarianism.
Wow, okay, now that's a thinker I haven't really grappled with in a while. How does she connect those dots?
So, Arendt's argued that these totalitarian regimes, they thrive by making people feel disoriented, like reality is unstable and unreliable.
And that makes people more vulnerable to being manipulated
Yeah.
because they're just looking for something that makes sense.
Yes, and Kakutani argues that the internet, with all this information, a lot of it unreliable or misleading, it creates a similar effect. We're overwhelmed with information, but we're starving for truth.
It's like we're in this digital funhouse, but with mirrors everywhere. You don't know what's real anymore. And as we said before, there are people who benefit from this confusion, people who use it for their own gain.
Kakutani specifically mentions people like Trump and Putin as being really good at this.
They've definitely weaponized disinformation.
Absolutely. They've taken advantage of how the internet creates these echo chambers where people only see information that confirms what they already think.
And it's scary how effective that is. It feels impossible to have a productive conversation across the political divides anymore.
That's why Kakutani says we need critical thinking, media literacy, being able to judge sources, recognize bias, all of that. It's about giving ourselves the tools to navigate this information overload and become more careful about what we believe.
It's about being responsible, not just about being right. But it feels so overwhelming sometimes. Where do you even begin to tackle something like online disinformation? It's everywhere.
That's the big question, right? And thankfully, Kakutani, she addresses it head on.
Okay, so what's the antidote?
Well, one thing she's a huge advocate for is supporting independent journalism. Having those sources you can trust, organizations committed to accuracy and truth, that's more crucial now than ever.
Absolutely. Investigative reporters, local news, they're so important for a healthy democracy.
Right. She highlights groups like Bellingcat. Have you heard of them?
Vaguely, remind me.
They're an investigative journalism group, all open source. They've done some incredible work uncovering disinformation, holding powerful people accountable, and they do it all using open source information and digital collaboration.
That's really cool, actually. It's like they're using the internet's own tools against it.
Exactly. But it's an uphill battle for sure. And Kakutani doesn't downplay that. She's honest about the challenges. But she also says, we can't give up, we can't give into cynicism or despair. We have to believe there's a better way.
So what you're saying is, it's not all doom and gloom. We're not just going to get swept away by this wave of unintended consequences.
That's where we'll pick up in our next segment. We'll talk about Kakutani's message of resilience and how we can navigate this era of massive change and maybe, hopefully, create a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so we've been through a lot, haven't we? We've really explored this whole great wave that Kakutani talks about, how it can disrupt things, how it can empower us, connect us, but also divide us. We've seen the downsides, those kind of hidden shadows behind all the promises of technology. But we haven't really talked about solutions yet. And thankfully, Kakutani, she doesn't just, leave us stranded. She gives us this idea of resilience.
Exactly. In these last chapters, she digs deep into what it means to not just survive in these times, but to actually thrive. It's about being flexible, learning from what came before, and even embracing the fact that we can't know everything that's coming.
Everyone's talking about resilience these days, but Kakutani really gets it something deeper, I think. She says it's not about going back to how things used to be, but building something new and better, something that can handle whatever hits it. So where do we even start?
Remember those 3 key things we talked about for being resilient? Learning from history, being open to change, and making democracy stronger.
I do.
Kakutani says these aren't just like nice ideas. They're tools we can use to deal with all this upheaval. Let's take another look at those, shall we?
Let's do it. Hit me with some more history.
All right, but this isn't about memorizing dates and battles, okay? Kakutani wants us to really get those moments when societies went through huge transformations and came out the other side even stronger than before, like after World War II.
We talked about that, yeah. But the amount of rebuilding they had to do is mind-boggling. Cities were rubble, economies were wrecked, and the whole world was dealing with this trauma.
It was a massive undertaking, and Kakutani, she says that one of the things that helped them succeed was this shared understanding that they couldn't just go back to how things were before the war. They had to create a new path.
Like that saying, you can't step in the same river twice, everything was different.
Exactly. And that's the kind of radical shift in thinking that Kakutani is talking about. We have to be willing to question those old systems, the old ways of thinking that don't work anymore. We have to ask ourselves, do these systems still work for us? Do they reflect our values, what we want the future to look like?
That's a big question. But change can be scary, even when you know it needs to happen. How do we get past that fear?
That's where that second element of resilience comes, and embracing change. Kakutani reminds us that a lot of times, the best innovations come from crises. When we're under pressure, we're forced to get creative, right? Find new ways to solve these huge problems.
Like they say, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly. Think about all those startups that popped up after the 2008 financial crisis. Airbnb, Uber, Instagram, they were all born during that really unstable time.
It's crazy how they tapped into what people needed and basically reinvented those entire industries.
And look at how quickly scientists developed those mRNA vaccines during COVID. That was a game changer. It's like we had this potential just waiting to be unlocked.
It really shows you what we're capable of when we have the will and the resources to make it happen. But it's not just about the technology, is it? It's also about being willing to adapt as people and as a society.
That's it, exactly. This great wave, as disruptive as it is, it's also full of opportunity.
Okay, so we've talked about learning from history and embracing change. What about that third ingredient? The one that feels super relevant right now.
Strengthening democracy.
Yeah, that feels more urgent than ever. With all the misinformation, the polarization, people losing faith in the systems that are supposed to serve them.
You're preaching to the choir. And Kakutani, she says that one of the best ways to strengthen democracy is to learn how to navigate this crazy information landscape we're living in. Remember when we were talking about media literacy?
Definitely. It's like teaching people to be their own BS detectors, to look at information with a critical eye, whether it's online or not.
Yes. Give people the ability to figure out what's true, what's not, to spot bias, and to just be smarter about what they consume. She uses Finland as a great example.
Finland, okay. What are they doing up there?
They've actually integrated media literacy into their school curriculum, starting in elementary school. Imagine that.
Wow, they're learning about fake news in grade school. That's really impressive.
It's a powerful way to protect people from manipulation. And Kakutani's point is that we need to be doing more of that here.
Makes you think, especially since that report came out recently, the one that said test scores for American students in history and civics are actually going down.
That's a worrying trend, no doubt. It shows how important it is to have strong, independent journalism.
100%. We need those sources we can trust more than ever, right?
Yeah.
Investigative reporters, local news, they're so important in the fight against misinformation.
Couldn't agree more. They hold those in power accountable. And here's the thing. Kakutani reminds us that a strong democracy isn't just about these big systems. It's about all of us, the people. We have to stay informed, get involved in our communities, and speak up against injustice.
It's recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And we all have a role to play.
Yes. And that's where Kakutani's message of cautious optimism is so important, I think. She's not saying it's going to be easy, but she's not giving up hope either.
So she really believes we can come out of this okay. That we can handle this great wave and end up in a better place.
She does, and I think that's a really powerful message, don't you think?
It is. It's inspiring even. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Michiko Kakutani's new The Great Wave. It's a book that makes you think, that's for sure, but ultimately I think it leaves you with a sense of hope. Hopefully this conversation has given you something to think about, maybe some new ways of looking at things as we navigate these crazy times.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to everyone listening, Keep asking those tough questions, keep listening to different points of view, and most importantly, don't be afraid of what the future holds. Until next time.